The third thing that you need to do in speech introductions, and let me go ahead and say this, later on in life, you're going to be able to skip this third thing. It's called establish credibility. Now, to give you an example, for those of you that maybe go to a place of worship, your rabbi or priest or preacher, when they start their message, almost always will have an attention getter and almost always will introduce the topic clearly. And then they will go, as soon as they introduce the topic clearly, many of them, if it's a good, strong, coherent message, will jump to number 4, which is preview the body, right? But a lot of them will skip number 3. Now, number 3, if you look again back on our evaluation form, is to establish credibility. So I did this. I want you to think on the very first set of video lectures. The very first thing I did was, no, like I didn't have an attention getter. I think I might have said welcome to speech class or something. But the very first thing I did was I introduced the topic of speech class to you very clearly. We went over the syllabus. I went page by page. I talked about everything that was expected, the assessments, the assignments, right? The policies, the guidelines. But right after that, there was a video lecture called Getting to Know Stanley, all right? And in that video lecture, I kind of gave my introductory speech, but I told you my introductory speech was probably going to be a little bit more boring than yours because mine dealt more with credibility, where I went to school, what I focused on in graduate school, my first teaching job, how long I'd been here. And so, but the other thing, if you notice what I did was I told you a little bit about me, about my family, about my hobbies. And what's interesting is, look, some of you have professors, even face-to-face professors, you know nothing about them other than the fact that they teach chemistry. Like you know nothing. What I'm trying to do is not only just establish credibility, but also, let me get to the right screen here, share screen. I got to get to this one right here. Okay. I'm telling you a little bit about my background, all right? But I was also trying to establish rapport, a connection, a relationship. Now, you guys don't necessarily have to do that in your speech. I'm not worried about you establishing rapport because we're in an academic setting. You're giving a speech on an internationally or nationally important topic. So if you want to establish a little bit of rapport, that's fine. But I don't want you to eat up a lot of time here. But yeah, I didn't have to tell you about me or my family and try to make a connection with you. But I like to have good relationships with students. Other professors may not. They don't want you to know about their family. They don't want you to know about their hobbies. I'm just not like that. So here's the deal. Let's get back to establishing credibility. And you can write this down. There are 2 ways that you can establish credibility, all right? One way is to just mention your expertise or experience. Now, I mentioned this when we were talking about finding a topic. Some of you chose a topic because it's been a hobby of yours for years. It just meets the 3 big criteria: controversial, of importance, and current. So I think I gave some examples of, like a lady is real into horses. She mentioned that. She goes, having ridden horses for 20 years, as well as winning 3 conference championships and blah, blah, blah. Do that. The guy that gave a speech on a controversial fishing issues, he said, having worked on a charter boat with my father for the last 5 summers. Basically, when you establish credibility and you mention your expertise, your experience, especially if it's expertise, you're kind of telling somebody kind of more subliminally, without telling them, I know more than you do. You don't ever want to tell an audience that. But remember, go back to that term I've mentioned that I said you never really had to write down, was experiential credibility. We listen to people who experiences are better than ours because we perceive that they know more and we can gain more from that. Now, so if you have any experience with the topic, fine. But we said the second way to choose a topic is choose one that you don't know a lot about, but you're very interested in. Many of you are choosing a topic because you find intriguing. You have no experience. You definitely don't have the expertise. So what are you left with? So here's the second option to establish credibility. And this is what most of my students have to do. Mention some of the research you've done. Now, be careful with this. I get students that go, so you want us, this is where we cite sources. Like this is where we give the name of the source and the date of the source. No. You give the name of the source and the date of the source when you dispense information. When you give that stat, give the name of the source and the date. When you give that expert testimony, give the name of the source and the date. And most of that is going to come in the body of the speech, right? What I want here is a very, very generic statement, okay? What a lot of you could do is something as simple as this. Do your attention getter, introduce your topic, and say, I received a lot of my information from journals and magazines in the field of medicine, as well as a personal interview I conducted with the local orthopedic surgeon. That took 7 seconds to get out, all right? You're telling, or you could say it this way. If you have experience, throw that in. Most having served for 5 years in the US military, as well as doing some research with some mainstream media and newspapers, I hope to give you better insight on this topic. That took 8 seconds. I'll give you 5. You might want to say this. A lot of my research comes from credible sources and databases on the Northwest Florida State College database or library. I'll give you a 5. I'll give you 5 for any one of those. Now, if you just said, like I said, I've been on the internet, that's pretty vague. But if you have any personal experience, if you conducted an interview, if it's your major, throw it in. Like if you're giving a speech on an education topic, saying being an education major myself, as well as finding this topic really intriguing, I decided to do a little bit more research on it. I'll give you a 5. Literally, I will give you a 5 for almost anything unless you skip it. Don't skip it. The reason that you're, again, minister or rabbi, or the reason that they skip this is because they've been there for 20 years. Now, if you get a new guest speaker in, if someone doesn't introduce them, they will probably establish credibility, right? When I go speak to companies or small businesses or organizations, I have an attention getter, I introduce a topic, and if no one has introduced me, I'll establish credibility, kind of like I do with you. I'll say, so I've been teaching for over 20 years at the college level. I'm telling them I have some experience. I want you to watch the news or ESPN or Project Runway or any one of those cooking shows. Literally, when they have somebody in at the beginning, they will say, joining us now is a former director of the FBI, author of the book, blah, 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 served under 3 administrations. They are establishing the credibility at the very beginning for that person joining. If you're watching, ESPN and someone's on there talking as a guest host, underneath that scroll, they'll be like, won 4 Super Bowls, 3-time Super Bowl MVP, Hall of Fame inductee. They're saying this person knows what they're talking about. This person is very smart. Most of you aren't going to have that expertise. So just mention that you've done research. And by the way, if you want to drop a couple of sources, that's fine. When you're establishing credibility and you say, a lot of my information came from news sources to include the Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times, I'm cool with that, but don't give the name and the source on everything. I get students that get up there and go, my information comes from New York Times, this date, Los Angeles Times, this date, Newsweek, this date. That's not what we want here. We want a generic statement under 10 seconds to establish that credibility. Don't skip it and you'll get a 5. Easy, easy, great. One more thing you're gonna have to do in the speech introduction coming up next.